Hello, and thank you for downloading the Reverse Osmosis Scaling Tendency Projection tool. Today, I will be taking you through some instructions and guidelines on how to use the model and some information about the various inputs and the type of outputs that the model generates. So the model is divided into three main sheets. The first sheet we can see down here in the lower left corner. It's called the dashboard. This is where all of the inputs and outputs are contained. The second sheet, labeled TCS, contains all of the consolidated calculations. And the third sheet, Stiffin-Davis, contains some relationships used to calculate the Stiffin-Davis saturation index. So starting on the first dashboard sheet, we have basically an input table containing all of the water quality and an output table which reports saturation tendencies for various dissolved constituents in the water. The instructions are a general list of rules that are used throughout the sheet, primarily in formatting. The input sections on the sheet and throughout the tool are formatted with blue text and white background. So we can see in the input table the various cationic and anionic dissolved salts, temperature, and pH, the values of which can be changed by just simply typing into the cell. On the output section, the output values are formatted in either green background or red background, which corresponds to the scaling tendency, the calculated scaling tendency of the relevant species or index or pretreatment. So going through the output table, we see that there's three main sections. We have the scaling saturation index, the scaling saturation percentage of certain salts. We have a section of indices, mainly for calcium carbonate and calcium phosphate. And finally, a pretreatment recommendation section for iron and aluminum. In all three of these sections, values for a given recovery are listed per each salt. And if that salt saturation scenario is in a range whereby scaling is expected, the value is reported with a red background. Conversely, if the scaling is below saturation, the value is reported with a green background. So in that way, we can see sort of at a glance where the scaling tendencies are, where the safe operational zones are, and where the dangerous operational zones are, just by looking at this table. So moving on to the consolidated calculation sheet, you can click in the lower left corner. We see that there's a variety of calculations done here. The user of this tool does not need to make any edits to the inputs or outputs from this sheet. All of these are already connected to the dashboard. So this sheet can be used simply as a reference to see what the different numerical steps are and numerical methods used to estimate the saturation fractions, scaling indices, or pretreatment recommendations, which are reported in the output table on the dashboard. So, for example, the LSI is calculated by a 7-step process, which is delineated here on the CCS sheet, and the sources for each of these methods are listed in the heading. Finally, the third sheet is the Stiffin-Davis sheet, which just contains some table relationships between the ionic strength of the solution and associated saturation constants at different temperatures. So this sheet is locked so that these values cannot be changed, and the other sheets which query these values with formulas are still functional. This concludes the tutorial on how to use the reverse osmosis scaling tendency tool. Please reach out with any questions or comments to us at Pacifica Water, and that can be done via email at info@pws-water.com. And thank you for downloading the tool.